You don't get to just show up here and ruin everything." My granddaughter spit those words at me from the doorway of the lake house I'd built with my own 2 hands 40 years ago, while behind her a roomful of strangers in cashmere sweaters stared at me like I was something the dog dragged in. They believed every word she'd told them, that the place was hers, that I was a confused old man who'd wandered up the wrong gravel road. But I had my reading glasses in one pocket and my phone in the other, and I knew that before the night was over, I'd watch the color drain right out of her face. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, because you're going to want to stick around to see how a man learns his own flesh and blood was selling his life out from under him. The drive up to Spirit Lake takes me a little under 3 hours from my place in Des Moines, and I'd made it maybe 400 times in my life. But that Friday in October, it felt like the longest stretch of road I'd ever driven. My wife Coraline had passed 18 months before. Pancreatic, quick and merciless the way it always is. After the funeral, I sort of disappeared into myself. I kept the hardware store open 6 days a week because the alternative was sitting in a quiet house listening to the refrigerator hum. And that fall, I finally decided I'd had enough of being a ghost in my own life. I closed the store for a long weekend, threw a duffel bag in the truck, and pointed myself north toward the only place on this earth that ever made me feel like myself. I built that lake house in the early 80s, back when I still had a young man's back and a foolish amount of optimism. Coraline and I weren't rich. I'd inherited a little money from my father and put every dollar of it into 80 feet of shoreline and a pile of lumber. And I framed most of the structure myself on weekends with my brother before he moved out to Oregon. 3 bedrooms, a stone fireplace. I laid rock by rock, a screened porch where Coraline used to drink her coffee and watch the loons. We raised our daughter there in the summers, taught her to swim off the end of that dock. And later, when she had a girl of her own, we did the whole thing over again with the next generation. My granddaughter is named Sloan. She's 26 now. My daughter Renata had her young and the marriage didn't last. So for a good chunk of Sloan's childhood, it was Coraline and me filling in the gaps, paying for things, showing up. I don't say that to make myself sound like a saint. I say it because I think somewhere along the way Sloan got the idea that the showing up and the paying for were just facts of nature, like rain, like sunrise. Things that happened to her rather than things people chose to do out of love. I'd given Sloan a key to the lake house 2 years back. She'd asked sweetest pie, said she and a couple girlfriends wanted a weekend away now and then. And what was I going to say? No? To Coraline's only grandbaby? I had a spare cut at the Ace down the street and handed it over and didn't think another thing about it. That was my first mistake, though I wouldn't understand the full size of it until I came up that driveway and saw the cars. There were 5 of them parked along my gravel turnaround. A black Tahoe, fresh off the lot by the look of it. 2 German sedans. I couldn't have told you the difference between if you'd paid me. A little convertible. And Sloan's Nissan, the one I'd co-signed the loan for. Every window in the house was lit up gold against the dusk, and somebody had strung those Edison bulb cafe lights across my porch railing that I sure as hell never put there. I could hear music. Not loud, but the kind of tasteful, expensive music that tells you people are standing around holding wine they're pretending to know something about. I sat in my truck with the engine ticking and tried to make it make sense. The people on God's green earth who had a key were me, my daughter, and Sloan. Renata lives down in Texas now, and we talk maybe twice a year, so I knew it wasn't her. I'll be honest with you, my first thought wasn't anger. It was a kind of dumb, sinking confusion. The feeling you get when you walk into a room and forget why. I'd come all this way to be alone with my memories and my lake, and somebody had filled my house with their party. The front door was unlocked. I let myself in, the way a man does in his own home, and I stood in my own entryway like a trespasser. They'd moved the furniture, my old leather chair, The one with the cracked armrest where Coraline always said she'd reupholster it one of these days had been shoved into a corner to make room for some sleek gray sofa I'd never laid eyes on. My fishing pictures were gone off the wall. In their place, somebody had hung framed black and white prints of seashells, of all the ridiculous things. We're 300 miles from the ocean. The whole place smelled like somebody's idea of a candle store. There were maybe 9 or 10 of them. An older couple held down the new sofa, the man in a quarter-zip pullover and pressed khakis, the woman with a silver bob and earrings that probably cost more than my truck. Younger folks were scattered around with stemware. And in the middle of all of it, by the kitchen island I'd installed myself the spring before Coraline got sick, stood my granddaughter in a dress I'd never seen, laughing with her head tipped back, one hand resting on the forearm of a tall young man who was looking at her like she'd personally invented the moon. Then she saw me. I watched something move across her face. For half a second it was just plain recognition, the look of a kid who's been caught. And then it shifted into something cold and quick, something I'd seen on her before, usually right around the time she needed a few $1,000s to get out of whatever scrape she talked herself into. She set down her glass. "Oh my God," she said, loud pitched for the room. "How did you get in here?" The whole place went quiet. Every head turned. The young man stepped halfway in front of her like he was shielding her from a bear. "Sloane," I said, "what is going on here?" "I don't know who you are," she said, "but you need to leave right now before I call the sheriff. I want you to understand, this is my granddaughter." I bounced her on my knee. I drove 4 hours each way to watch her graduate high school, and I cried into Coraline's shoulder doing it. And she stood there in the house I built and looked at me like I was a stranger who'd crawled in off the highway. The tall young man found his voice. "Sir, you heard her. This is private property. You can't just walk in." "Private property," I repeated. I felt something settle in my chest, cold and steady. "Son, I poured the footings for this porch in 1983. "He's confused," Sloane announced to the room, tapping at her phone with hands that weren't quite steady. "He does this. He's not well. My grandfather passed 2 years ago. This is just some man who—" "I'm standing right here," I said. The older woman on the sofa rose to her feet. She had the bearing of somebody used to being listened to. "Sloane, honey," she said carefully, "how does this gentleman know your name?" "And I'll give my granddaughter this much." She did not blink. "He probably found me online. There's some local man who's been harassing me about the property line. I told you about him." She turned to the young man. "Bo, please, can you just call the sheriff? I don't feel safe." The young man, Bo apparently, had his phone out, thumb hovering, but the older man on the sofa, the one in the quarter zip, hadn't moved. He was watching me with a flat, assessing look, a banker's look, the kind of man who reads the fine print, and his eyes had dropped to my right hand. "If this isn't your house, young lady," he said slowly, "then why does this man have a key on his ring?" I'd forgotten I was even holding it. My keys with the little brass fish charm Caroline gave me the Christmas after we finished the place. Sloane's eyes flicked to my hand, and I watched the gears turn behind him. "He must have made a copy," she said. "He's been stalking the property. That's why I had the locks changed." "Did you?" I said. "When?" "Last month." "Funny, because this key opened the door about 90 seconds ago." The room got very still. The young woman who'd been quiet in the armchair, a girl who couldn't have been more than 22, sat forward. "Sloane," she said, and her voice had a wobble in it. "At the engagement dinner, you told my parents your grandparents left you the lake house. You said your grandmother used to drink her coffee on that porch and watch the loons." I felt that one in my teeth, because that was true. That was Caroline. That was the realest thing my granddaughter had said in months, and she'd handed it to strangers like a stolen photograph. "Reese, you're confused," Sloane said, but the smoothness had gone out of her. "I'm not confused," the girl said. You showed us pictures? The older man, the banker, stood up. Sloan, you told us at dinner 3 weeks ago that you owned this place free and clear. You said that's why you only needed the bridge loan for the wedding and the renovations, $40,000. We were going to wire it Monday. The temperature in that room dropped 10 degrees, and I watched my granddaughter's beautiful, carefully built house of cards start to lean. I'd heard enough. My name is Theodore Marsh, I said, and I made my voice fill the room the way I used to when I caught teenagers shoplifting at the store. Everybody calls me Ted. I'm 68 years old. I own a hardware store on 42nd in Des Moines that I've run for 31 years. I built this house with my brother in 1983. I have the deed in the lockbox in the hall closet where it's been since the day they recorded it at the county. I have 40 years of property tax receipts. I can show you the building permits with my name on them. I can show you the photographs of my late wife pregnant with this young woman's mother standing on that dock out there. I looked at Sloan. Or we can keep doing this. Your choice. Nobody said anything. The music had ended at some point, and nobody had put on more. You could hear the lake lapping against the dock through the screen door. He's lying, Sloan whispered, but it came out small. The banker's wife had gone the color of paper. The girl, named Reese, had both hands over her mouth, and Bo, the young man, was staring at my granddaughter like he was seeing her face for the first time. Let's just let the sheriff sort it out, the banker's wife said, and she had her own phone up before Sloan could stop her. There's no harm in that, is there, Sloan? If it's your house, this would be very simple. The deputy who showed up 20 minutes later was a woman in her 30s with a tired, careful way of looking at things, and a younger fellow rode along with her who didn't say much. By then, the party had gone to ash. Everybody stood around the room not making eye contact. The deputy took in the scene with one slow sweep and said, "Somebody want to tell me who called and what about?" "I did," the banker's wife said. "We have 2 people claiming to own this house." The deputy looked between Sloan and me. "Names." "Sloan Marsh," my granddaughter said, and even then she lifted her chin. "Theodore Marsh. She's my granddaughter." The deputy's eyebrows ticked up half an inch. "She your granddaughter, or you saying that's your house?" "Both," I said. "Her mother is my daughter Renata. Sloan was born at Mercy in Des Moines in the spring of 1999. She's got a scar on her chin from when she fell off the dock chasing the dog when she was 6, and I drove her to the ER doing 80 the whole way while my wife held a dish towel to her face. You can see the scar from where you're standing." I watched Sloan's hand drift up toward her own chin before she caught herself. The deputy turned to her. "Ma'am, is this your grandfather?" For a long moment, Sloan didn't answer. I could see her running the math, the same way she'd run it her whole life, looking for the angle, the exit, the version of the story where she came out ahead. And for the first time I could remember, she couldn't find one. "Filing a false report's a crime, ma'am," the younger deputy said quietly. "If you told these folks something that wasn't true, now's the time to set it straight." The whole room was looking at her, and my granddaughter, who told strangers her grandmother watched loons from that porch, who'd taken a dead woman's life and worn it like a costume, finally looked at the floor. "Yes," she said. "He's my grandfather." I'd thought I'd feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt about 100 years old. The banker made a sound like he'd been punched. His wife sat back down hard. Reese was crying without making any noise. And Bo, God help him, just kept saying, "I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't understand," over and over, until his mother put a hand on his arm. "Theodore." The banker turned to me, and there was steel in him now, the kind that comes up in a man who realizes he's been played. "Did you know about any of this?" "I found out about 10 minutes before you did," I said. "I drove up here to be alone. This is the first I'm learning that my granddaughter's been telling people she owns my house." "She told us she inherited it," he said. "She told us her grandparents were both gone. She showed us a photograph of an older couple on the dock and said it was them." "That photograph," I said, "is of my wife and me. Coraline, 2 summers ago, about 4 months before the cancer took her. The room was so quiet I could hear Reese's breath hitching. I want to tell you the part that put the iron in my spine, because up until then, I think part of me was still her grandfather looking for a way to soften it, to get her alone, to fix it the way I'd fixed everything for that girl her whole life. But then the banker said something that changed the shape of the whole evening. She also told us, he said slowly, watching my face, that the wedding renovations had already started. That she'd hired the contractor to put in a new kitchen and redo the master bath, and she needed the bridge loan because the contractor wanted half down. 40,000. She had an invoice and everything. A contractor. In my house. I walked past all of them, down the hall, and pushed open the door to the master bedroom. The bedroom Coraline died in a rented hospital bed by the window so she could see the water. And somebody had pried up a section of the floor near the bathroom door. Drop cloths. A demolition started and abandoned. Sloane hadn't just lied about owning my house. She'd started tearing it apart to make her lie look true. She'd taken a sledgehammer to the room where her grandmother took her last breath, and she'd done it to squeeze $40,000 out of a family she'd known for less than a year. I came back into the living room very calm. That's the thing nobody tells you about real anger, the kind that matters. It doesn't shout. It gets quiet and cold and clear as lake ice in January. How long? I asked her. How long have you been telling people this is yours? She didn't answer. How many people, Sloane? Is it just these folks, or have there been others? Have you borrowed money before, telling them you had property to back it? Her silence was its own answer. I took out my phone. I'm not a fancy man. I don't keep up with much technology, but Caroline's nephew set me up a few years back with the banking app and the auto pay and all of it, mostly so I'd stop driving to the branch every Friday. And over the years, without much thinking about it, I'd let an awful lot of Sloane's life route through my accounts. You all want to know what I'd been paying for, I said. And I held the phone up, not for them, really. For her. Her car. $390 a month. That little Nissan in my driveway. I co-signed it because the dealer wouldn't give a 23-year-old with no credit a loan, and I've made every payment because she kept forgetting. I scrolled. Her phone on my plan. Her health insurance, I pay the premium every month because she, between jobs. Her apartment in the Highland Park area, I've been covering $1,100 of the $1,500 rent for going on 2 years. There's a credit card. She's an authorized user on that. I look at every month and pretend the charges are mine. I did the arithmetic out loud, the way I'd done 1,000 invoices at the store. All told, since her grandmother passed, I figure I've put about $40,000 a year into keeping my granddaughter afloat. Call it $70,000 in the last 2 years, and in all that time, she never once called to ask how I was doing after I buried my wife. Not once. But she called plenty when she needed the rent. Bo made a small wounded noise. You told me you were a financial analyst, he said to her. You told me you made $90,000 a year. Sloane closed her eyes. I'll be honest, I'd carried a particular kind of guilt for a long time, and standing in that wrecked living room, I finally understood it for what it was. After Renata's marriage fell apart, after Coraline and I watched our daughter struggle, I think we both decided we'd protect Sloane from ever feeling that instability. We'd be the floor she couldn't fall through. We never made her earn a thing. We never let her feel the bottom. And somewhere in there, we'd raised a young woman who could stand in a dead woman's bedroom, surrounded by the debris of a lie, and feel nothing but the inconvenience of being caught. That was on me as much as it was on her. Maybe more. So I started tapping. The car, I said. I'm calling the lender Monday morning to take my name off the cosign and stop the auto pay. You can make the payment yourself, or they'll come take it. Your choice. Grandpa, the phone. I tapped. I'm removing your line at the end of the cycle. You'll want to get your own before it goes dark. Pleases. The apartment. I've been on the phone with that property manager enough times that he knows me by name. I'll be calling him Monday to take myself off as guarantor. You'll need to cover the full rent yourself or work something out with him. That's between you and him now. The credit card, I said, and this one I did right there, opening the account, finding the button. I'm removing you as an authorized user, effective tonight. The screen blinked its little confirmation. Whatever's on there, that's yours. I put the phone in my pocket. Everything I've been carrying for you, I said, I'm setting it down. Not to be cruel, because I finally understand that the carrying is what crippled you. Every time I caught you, I taught you that you'd always be caught. I raised you to believe the ground would never come up to meet you. Well, here's the ground. She was crying now, real tears, but I'd seen Sloane cry before, and I'd learned the hard way that the tears and the truth didn't always travel together. The deputy cleared her throat. Mr. Marsh, what do you want to happen tonight? You want these folks off your property? I looked around at the banker and his wife, who'd been minutes from wiring $40,000 to a stranger. At the young man who'd thought he was marrying a financial analyst with a lake house. At the girl, Reese, who'd believed a sweet story about loons and a grandmother's coffee. None of them had done a thing to me. They were just people my granddaughter had used as furniture in her play. I want everyone out, I said. Take what you brought. You've got an hour. And somebody's going to give me the name of that contractor before they leave, because I intend to have a conversation with him about whose house he's been tearing up. The banker rose. We'll be out in 20 minutes. He looked at Sloane with an expression I wouldn't wish on anybody. We will not be hearing from you again, and if you ever use our family's name to borrow a nickel, I will make sure you regret it. What followed was the saddest scramble I ever watched. Strangers gathering coats and overnight bags, the older couple moving with the brisk efficiency of people who badly want to be somewhere else. Bo wouldn't look at Sloane while he carried his bag past her. Reese paused in the doorway and looked at me and said very softly, I'm sorry about your wife. And then she was gone into the dark, and that one nearly broke me clean in half. The deputy stayed while the cars pulled out one by one, headlights swinging across the trees. The Tahoe first, then the German cars, then the little convertible. Sloane's Nissan sat in the driveway, and she stood beside it, not knowing what to do, because where exactly does a person go when the floor finally gives? Mr. Endure. Marsh, the woman deputy said to me quietly while her partner watched the cars leave, you want us to do anything further? Given the situation with the loan she was soliciting, there could be a fraud angle if those folks wanted to press it. That's their call, I said, not mine. I just want my house back. She nodded and handed me a card. If she comes back uninvited, you call us. Given tonight, a judge would have no trouble keeping her away. When their cruiser finally crunched down the gravel and turned onto the county road, the silence came down over that house like snow. I stood in the wreckage of it, the torn-up floor, the seashell prints, the candle smell, my old chair shoved into the corner like something nobody wanted anymore. Sloane was still out there by her car. I went out onto the porch. The night was cold and clean, and the loons were calling out on the water, the way they have every fall for 40 years, the way they did the morning Coraline died. Grandpa, Sloane said, where am I supposed to go? And here's the thing I have to confess to you, because this is a true story, and a true story has to include the parts that don't make you look good. For 1 second, 1 single second. The old reflex came up in me like a tide. Get in the truck, I almost said. We'll figure it out. There's a motel on the highway. I'll get you a room. Let me fix it. 40 years of fixing it right there in my throat. I swallowed it down. You're going to figure that out, I said. The way you've been telling everyone you already do. She drove off around 11. I watched her taillights disappear, and then I went inside and I sat in my cracked old chair, the one I pulled back out of the corner and dragged into its proper place by the cold fireplace, and I sat there in the dark for a long time. The texts started before midnight. Grandpa, I'm so sorry. Grandpa, please, I have nowhere to go. Grandpa, you can't just throw me away. I read them and I set the phone face down. By morning there were 31 of them, and they'd run the whole circuit, sorrow to anger, to bargaining to a cold little message that said, "Fine, I hope you're happy alone," which I have to tell you stung more than she'll ever know, because alone was exactly what I was. And her grandmother was the one who used to make it feel like something other than a wound. Renata called me 2 days later from Texas. I hadn't talked to my own daughter since Easter. "Dad, you have to help her. She's living in her car." I told her Sloan had a job, or said she did, and a paycheck could buy a tank of gas the same as mine could. Renata told me I was cold. Renata told me I'd always loved being the hero, and now I was just punishing Sloan for not needing rescuing prettily enough. That one I sat with for a few days, I'll admit, because there's always a sliver of truth in the cruelest thing a person says to you. But I kept coming back to the floor pried up in the room where Caroline died, and I let it go. Winter came on. I kept the store open, and I drove up to the lake on the weekends, and slowly, board by board, I put my house back together. I had a real contractor come fix what Sloan's had torn up, and I stood in that bedroom while he laid the new floor, and I told him about Coraline in the hospital bed by the window, and he listened, the way decent men do, and didn't say much, and that was exactly right. The messages thinned out. By February they'd stopped. Then, on a gray Tuesday in March, my phone rang from a number I didn't know, and something made me answer it. Grandpa. Her voice was different. Smaller. No angle in it that I could hear, though Lord knows I'd been fooled before. "Please don't hang up." I didn't say anything. "I'm not calling to ask for money," she said. "I know you won't, and I don't expect you to. I got a job, a real one, at a credit union downtown, entry level. It doesn't pay much. I'm renting a room from a lady out in Ankeny. I sold the Nissan back before they could take it, and I bought a beater Corolla with my own money, and it's the first thing I've ever owned that nobody gave me." She took a breath. "I started seeing a counselor. Through work, it's free. I've been talking about Grandma, about how I never let myself feel that she was gone, because feeling it meant I'd actually lost something, and I'd spent my whole life being protected from losing things." Her voice cracked. "What I did to you at the lake, to her bedroom, there's no version of sorry big enough for that. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I just needed you to know I see it now." I looked out my kitchen window at the gray Des Moines sky. I thought about a little girl with a dish towel pressed to her chin in the back seat of my truck, looking up at me like I could fix the whole world, and how badly I'd wanted to be the man who could. "Sloan," I said, "I'm glad you're working. I'm glad about the counselor. I mean that. But I'm not the floor anymore. I can't be. It was killing both of us, and only one of us knew it." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to be. If you're really doing the work," I said, "then do it. Don't tell me about it. Show me over years, not over a phone call. Maybe a long way down the road we have a cup of coffee somewhere neutral, and we see who you've become. But right now, I need to grieve my wife, without also bailing out the granddaughter who used her memory for a loan. Can you understand that?" There was a long quiet on the line. "Yeah," she said. "I can. That's fair. Take care of yourself," I told her. "You too, Grandpa." I hung up. I didn't block the number this time. I just set the phone down and let it be a thing that had happened. Neither a door slammed nor a door flung open. Just a door sitting there. We'll see. That weekend I drove up to the lake. The ice was just starting to go off the water, dark cracks running through the white, and the first loons were back early, riding the open patches near the shore. I made a pot of coffee and carried it out to the screened porch, and I sat in Caroline's spot, the one she always took, watching the water the way she used to. For the first time since the funeral, the quiet didn't feel like a wound. It just felt like quiet, like a house that was mine, paid for, fought for, built with these two hands 40 years ago, and finally empty of everything that didn't belong in it. A man spends his whole life thinking love means never letting them fall. It took me 68 years and the worst night of my life to learn that sometimes the most loving thing your hands can do is open and let go, and let the ground teach what you never could. The lake doesn't apologize for freezing over. It just trusts that spring will come in its own time the way it always has, and I'm learning, slow as I am, to trust the same. The floor pried up in Caroline's bedroom is the thing I keep coming back to. Not the lie itself, not even the strangers in my living room, but that torn up patch of wood by the bathroom door. Because that's where you could see exactly how a small dishonesty grows teeth when nobody stops it. Sloane didn't wake up one morning a person who'd tear apart the room her grandmother died in. She got that one unpaid car payment at a time, one covered rent at a time, one rescue at a time, with Caroline and me handing her the lesson over and over, that consequences were something that happened to other people. We thought we were loving her. We were teaching her she'd never have to be honest, because honesty only matters when a lie might actually cost you something. And we'd made sure nothing ever did. I've had a long winter to think about why it went the way it went, and I keep landing on the same plain truth. A person needs 3 things to stand up straight in this world, and we'd robbed Sloane of all 3 while believing we were giving her everything. She had no real sense of right and wrong because we never let a wrong thing land on her. She had no judgment, no ability to look down the road and see where a choice ends up because we'd always swerved the car for her before she hit the wall. And she had no grit, no strength to sit inside something hard and stay there until it taught her something. Because the second anything got difficult, my checkbook came out. You cannot build a whole human being and leave out the spine. What I want you to hear, if you're a parent or a grandparent listening to me ramble, is that the rescuing felt like love every single time. That's the trap. It looked like generosity. It felt like devotion. And it was quietly stealing from her the exact muscles she needed to carry her own life. The kindest thing I ever did for that girl, I did at 68, standing in a wrecked living room, opening my hands and letting her fall to a floor I should have let her reach 20 years sooner. And here's the part that gives me some peace at night. Cause and effect runs both directions. The same way years of rescue grew a young woman who could deny her own grandfather. 6 months of consequence grew one who sold her own car to make rent, found a job, sat down with a counselor, and finally let herself feel that her grandmother was gone. I didn't fix Sloane. I couldn't. I just stopped standing between her and the truth turned out to be a better teacher than I ever was. Decency, good sense, and the strength to endure a hard season aren't things you can hand someone. They're things a person earns by being allowed to struggle. The most loving word in the English language, it turns out, is sometimes just no.